My stepsister walked into my kitchen, holding a real estate agent's business card, and told my husband, right in front of me, that the house should never have been mine to begin with. She said it the way people say things they've rehearsed in the car on the drive over. Derek didn't correct her. He just looked at the floor and let her keep talking. What neither of them knew was that I had been rehearsing something too, for 6 years, ever since the week I got married and quietly asked a lawyer to draft one piece of paper that nobody in my family ever saw. That paper was sitting in a safety deposit box, 3 miles from that kitchen. And by the end of that summer, it was going to matter more than anything either of them had planned. Welcome to Dark Revenge. This is the channel for the stories about the people who only circle back into your life once you got something worth taking. The stepsisters, the in-laws, the siblings who go quiet for years and then get very warm at exactly the wrong time. If a story like that has ever happened to you, or to someone you love, stay through this one, because it gets worse before it gets better. And if you want more stories like it, the kind about people who win by staying calm instead of loud, subscribing is free, and we put a new one out every week. My name is Naomi Calloway. I'm 34, and for 11 years I've worked as a structural engineer, mostly residential retrofits. Old houses that need their bones checked before anyone touches the walls. It's not glamorous work. I spend a lot of my week in crawl spaces with a headlamp and a moisture meter, telling homeowners things they didn't want to hear about their foundations. But I'm good at it, and I like it, because a house doesn't lie to you if you know how to read it. Permits don't lie either. Neither do bank statements. I come to lean on that fact more than I ever expected to. I married Derek Ashford when I was 28. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and I liked that he asked follow-up questions, actually listened for the answers, remembered small things I'd mentioned weeks earlier. He sold commercial insurance. He was steady in the way I'd never had growing up, and for the first 5 years of our marriage I would have told you, without hesitating, that I'd built a good life. We lived in a rented 2-bedroom near downtown Millbrook, saving what we could. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. Then my grandmother died, and everything about our life quietly rearranged itself around a house on Wren Street that I hadn't bought and didn't expect. That one detail, that the house was never ours, only ever mine, is the reason I'm telling you any of this at all. To understand why I was ready for what came later, you have to understand what I grew up with. My mother, Elaine, died when I was 9. Ovarian cancer, fast once they finally found it. My father, Thomas, remarried within 2 years, a woman named Denise, who came with a daughter close to my age named Camille. I want to be fair here, because it would be easy to make this simple, and it wasn't simple. Denise was never cruel in the loud, obvious way you see in movies. She was cruel in the administrative way, quiet and procedural, easy to miss unless you were the one it kept happening to. Camille got the bigger bedroom because hers faced the street, which Denise said was better for a growing girl anyway. Camille got dance lessons on Tuesdays and gymnastics on Thursdays. I got the hand-me-down, leotard from a girl 2 grades ahead whose mother worked with Denise at the county clerk's office. Whenever money got tight in our house, and it was always somehow tight, even in years my father's paycheck said it shouldn't be, it was never Camille's activities that disappeared first. Mine did. I remember asking, the year I turned 10, if I could take piano like my friend Jill down the street. Denise laughed, not unkindly, and said we could maybe manage 1 lesson a month, which in practice meant 0. Camille started piano the following spring, twice a week, with a rental upright delivered to the living room. The one adult who noticed any of it was my grandmother, Vera Lindqvist, my mother's mother. Vera lived across town in a small craftsman bungalow on Wren Street that she and my grandfather had bought in 1971 for less than the price of a decent used car today. Every other Sunday, my father would drop me at her house for the afternoon. Mostly, I understand now, because it got me out of Denise's hair for a few hours and gave Camille the run of the house. Vera made me tomato soup from a can and let me help her weed the garden, and she was the only adult in my life back then who asked me real questions and then actually waited for the answers instead of already thinking about her next sentence. There's one thing Vera told me on that back step that I carried for 25 years without fully understanding it. I was 12, sitting there with a glass of lemonade after Camille had just had a birthday party with a rented moon bounce and a hired-face painter, while my own birthday 3 weeks earlier had gotten a box mix cake Denise left in the oven 10 minutes too long. Vera sat down next to me, didn't ask why I was quiet, just said, Naomi, don't ever let people who arrived late decide what you're worth. Some of what's coming to you is only ever going to be yours. Remember that when the time comes. I thought she meant something vague and comforting, the kind of thing grandmothers say. I had no idea, at 12, that she meant it as an actual plan, one she'd already started putting in motion on paper. There was history behind that comment I wouldn't learn until I was in my 30s, going through an old folder after she died. Decades earlier, long before I was born, before Denise ever met my father, Denise had borrowed a significant sum of money from Vera during a hard year, money Vera had set aside for her own retirement, and never paid a dollar of it back. Vera didn't make a scene about it at the time. She simply stopped lending Denise anything ever again, and years later, when Denise married my father, Vera was polite to her at holidays and never once trusted her with so much as a spare key. I only understood the full shape of that history much later. At 12, all I knew was that my grandmother's house felt safer than my own, and I didn't ask why. When Derek and I got engaged, 6 years before any of this reached its breaking point, I did something I never told a single member of my family, not even my own father. A coworker's messy divorce had put the idea in my head. I'd watched him lose half of a house his parents had helped him buy, simply because nobody had ever written down that it was meant to stay his. I didn't want to become a story like that. So before the wedding, I met with a family law attorney named Priya Okafor and had her draft a simple postnuptial agreement, one specific clause, stating that any property I inherited, along with any future renovations or improvements made to it, would remain my separate property regardless of whose labor or funds went into maintaining it. Derek signed it a few months after we married, over coffee at our kitchen table, mostly amused. "I trust you more than I trust a piece of paper," he said, and signed it anyway because I'd asked him to. That was 8 years before any of this started. I don't think he remembered it existed by the time it mattered. I never forget paperwork. It's the one thing about me that hasn't changed since I was a kid keeping track of who got what. Vera passed away when I was 29, 3 years into the marriage. She left me the Wren Street house outright. Not to my father, not divided among grandchildren, just to me, in a will that had been updated and notarized 11 years earlier and never touched again after that. My father didn't contest it. Denise, from what I heard secondhand through my father, was furious for about a month and then went quiet about it, the particular kind of quiet that isn't surrender, so much as regrouping. Camille didn't say much either way at the time. She sent a nice card, signed just her name, no note. I didn't think much of it. I had no reason to yet. Derek and I sold our rental and moved into Wren Street within the year. I spent the next 4 years bringing it back to life room by room, doing the structural work myself and hiring out the rest. New wiring throughout, a rebuilt foundation wall on the north side, a kitchen that finally worked the way a kitchen should. I funded every bit of it from the trust account Vera had also left me, entirely separate from anything Derek and I share day to day. I want to be specific about that detail because it matters enormously later. Every invoice, every contractor payment, every dollar of that renovation ran through an account that had never once had Derek's name on it. The first sign that something had shifted arrived, as far as I can trace it now, at my 33rd birthday dinner. We'd invited my father, Denise, and Camille to Wren Street, the first time that particular group had all sat at that particular table since Vera's funeral 4 years earlier. Camille arrived with a bottle of wine and seemed unusually warm, complimenting the renovation room by room, running her hand along the new kitchen island the way you'd run a hand along something you were pricing. When Derek stood to make a toast, she raised her glass a half-second before he'd even finished a sentence and said, "To new beginnings. Some people finally get what's coming to them." She smiled when she said it, aimed at exactly one person in the room. I laughed it off, the way you laugh off things at your own dinner table, so the evening doesn't sour. Derek didn't quite meet my eyes when their glasses clinked. I noticed that. I filed it away without knowing what drawer to put it in yet. By Thanksgiving that year, the questions had started. Derek began asking things that didn't fit our life at that particular moment, what the house might appraise for now, whether a place like ours would be considered joint property if something ever happened to us, phrased casually, over dishes, like idle curiosity between two people who loved each other. I told him, honestly, that Vera left it to me alone and that it had always stayed separate, the way it always had. He nodded like that had answered something specific for him, which struck me as a strange thing to need answered on a random Tuesday in November when nothing in our marriage seemed to be in danger. Around the same time, Camille started coming around more than she ever had in the 10 years I'd known her. She and Derek had never been close before. A few family gatherings a year, nothing more. But suddenly she was stopping by on weekends to see the garden, bringing him coffee when he worked from home on Fridays, texting him articles with titles like Protecting Yourself Financially in a Long Marriage. I found one of those links open on our shared laptop once, read the headline, and closed the tab without saying anything, the way you close a door you're not ready to look behind yet. If you've ever had someone circle a little closer right as your life started going well, you already know that feeling in your stomach before you have a shred of proof to back it up. That's exactly where I was standing. If that's landing anywhere close to home for you, drop a comment. I read every one of them. And if you want the next story the moment it goes live, Dark Revenge is one tap away. Here's the thing about growing up the way I did. You learn early that the time to protect what's yours is before anyone else realizes you have something worth taking, not after. I already had a post-nuptial agreement, signed and notarized 8 years earlier, sitting quietly in a safety deposit box. But once the questions and the coffee visits and the strange little comments started stacking up, I stopped assuming that piece of paper alone would be enough. I wanted a complete file, the kind I'd build for a client whose foundation was showing hairline cracks nobody else had noticed yet. I drove to the bank on a gray Saturday in January and pulled everything from the box: the postnuptial agreement, Vera's original 1971 deed, the notarized letter she'd written years before she died explaining the house was to pass to me and me alone, and 4 years of renovation invoices, every one paid from an account that had never had Derek's name on it. From there I went to the county recorder's office, where building permits are public record and cost about $12 and 10 minutes of standing in line if you know which counter to ask for. Every permit for the Wren Street renovation had my name on it and my engineering license number stamped beside it. Not a joint filing, not Derek's name anywhere on the page. Then I called Priya Okafor, the attorney who drafted the original agreement. We met for coffee near her office on a Thursday afternoon in February, and I laid the whole folder out on the table between us the way I'd lay out inspection photos for a client. She read through the post-nuptial agreement twice, then looked up and said, "Naomi, this is about as clean as it gets. Whoever drafted this for you 8 years ago did you a real favor." I told her I already knew who drafted it. I didn't ask her to file anything yet. I just wanted to hear a professional say, out loud, that the ground I thought I was standing on was actually solid. It was. Derek filed for divorce that April. I want to be honest and tell you the marriage had problems that had nothing to do with Camille. We drifted the way people sometimes do, working long hours in opposite directions, going quiet at dinner more nights than not. By the time the papers arrived, I wasn't shocked by the divorce itself, only by the timing of it. 6 weeks after Camille had started leaving self-help articles about marital finances open on our laptop. What genuinely surprised me was the first mediation session, held in a beige conference room downtown with a water pitcher nobody touched, when I walked in and found Camille already seated in the row of chairs along the wall. Not a party to the case, with no legal standing in the room at all, but there anyway, seated close to Derek's new attorney, a man named Mitch Traver whose business card, I'd learn afterward, Camille had handed Derek herself. Derek's position, laid out by Traver in careful, obviously rehearsed language, was that the Wren Street renovation represented roughly $300,000 of added value created during the marriage through what he called joint marital effort and contribution, and that Derek was entitled to half of that increase regardless of who had originally owned the underlying property. Camille, from her chair against the wall, said, not quietly, loud enough for the mediator to look up, "Blood already lost that house once. We're not losing it twice." My father, sitting a few chairs down because I'd asked him to come for support, went very still and didn't say a word. I didn't say anything either. I'd learned that particular lesson a long time ago, at a different table, at 9 years old, watching an adult decide what I deserved out loud in front of people who wouldn't stand up for me. I opened the plain manila folder in my lap, the same kind I use for every job site inspection, and waited for my turn, which didn't come that day. The mediator adjourned the session to allow both sides to finish document discovery. I drove home and didn't sleep well that night, not from fear exactly, more the particular restlessness of someone who knows a second round is coming and wants it over with. Over the following 2 weeks, discovery, the part of a divorce where both sides are legally required to disclose their finances, started turning up things I hadn't known, mostly because Derek's own disclosures told me more than he probably meant them to. A year earlier, Camille had paid off nearly $11,000 of a business loan Derek had taken out for a side venture that never got off the ground, a loan he had never once mentioned to me in 8 years of marriage. There was no record anywhere of him paying her back a cent. Then came the texts, pulled into the discovery file because Derek's phone records were part of his own required disclosure. In 3 separate messages over the span of that winter, Camille had told him some version of the same idea, that if he played it smart, the house could end up sold as part of the settlement, and that she'd make it worth it for him if it did. Reading those messages in Priya's office, printed and highlighted, was the closest I came to actually feeling angry through the entire process. Not at Derek, really. At how long Camille had apparently been planning this without me having the faintest idea a plan existed. My father called me that same week, quiet on the phone in a way I hadn't heard from him since the year my mother died. He'd found an old folder of Vera's while cleaning out a closet at his own house, letters she'd written but apparently never sent, addressed to no one in particular, more like a private ledger of her own thinking over the years. One of them, dated the year I turned 12, explained plainly why she'd never trust Denise with money again, and closed with a line that matched, almost word for word, what she told me on her back step that same summer. Don't ever let people who arrived late decide what you're worth. My father read it to me over the phone and didn't say much else afterward. I think it was the first time, at nearly 70, he fully understood what his second wife's family had quietly been counting on the entire time he'd been married to her. Around that same point, a cousin forwarded me a screenshot from the extended family group chat, the one I'd been slowly phased out of over the years the way I'd been phased out of a lot of things. Denise had posted there that I was kicking Derek out to protect Grandma Vera's money, and that it was sad what money does to people. A few relatives had responded with sympathetic emojis before anyone had heard a single fact from my side. I didn't argue in the group chat. I sent one message, privately, to the 2 relatives I actually trusted, with copies of the deed date, the postnuptial agreement date, and the timeline of who filed for divorce against whom. I asked them to share it further only if they felt it was warranted. Within a week, the tone in that group chat had gone very quiet, and Denise never brought the subject up in it again. I didn't need to raise my voice for that. I just needed the dates to be visible. The second mediation session landed on a Tuesday in June. Trevor opened with the same argument as before, more confidently this time, still framing the renovation as joint marital contribution. Priya let him finish completely. She's very good at letting people finish completely before she moves. Then she slid 3 documents across the table, one at a time, the way you deal cards to someone who was still convinced they were holding a strong hand. The first was the deed, showing the house transferred to me alone 11 months before Derek and I were even engaged. The second was 4 years of renovation invoices and bank statements, every payment traced to a trust account that had never held a single dollar of Derek's income. The third was the postnuptial agreement itself, dated 8 years earlier, Derek's own signature at the bottom, specifically naming Wren Street and any future improvements to it as my separate property, regardless of the source of funds or labor contributed during the marriage. Derek's face did something I'll remember for a long time. Not anger, exactly. Something closer to recognition. The look of a man watching a door he hadn't realized was locked click shut in front of him. He leaned toward Trevor and said something too quiet for me to catch. Trevor read the agreement twice, the way people read something a second time, hoping it'll say something different than it did the first time. It didn't. Camille, still sitting against the wall despite having no legal standing in the room at all, didn't say anything this time. For the first time since my birthday dinner, I watched her run completely out of things to say. Priya, calm through the entire exchange, said only this: my client's separate property claim on Wren Street isn't a legal theory. It's a signed agreement, a clean chain of title, and a paper trail with no gaps in it. I'd recommend withdrawing this portion of the claim before we're doing this in front of a judge instead of a mediator. Derek withdrew the claim that same afternoon. Not because I asked him to, not because anyone raised their voice, but because there was simply nothing left to argue with. The rest of the divorce settled within a month, quietly, the way most divorces should and rarely do. I kept Wren Street, whole and unshared, exactly the way Vera had left it to me. I never confronted Camille directly, and I never told my father to cut her out of anything. I didn't need to. I laid out what discovery had turned up once, over coffee at his kitchen table, the loan payoff, the texts, the timeline, and let him draw his own conclusions the same way I'd learned to let a house tell its own story instead of arguing with it. My father is not a fast man, but he isn't a foolish one either. He and Denise had a difficult 6 months after that conversation, and while they eventually worked things out privately between themselves, my father stopped including Camille in anything that touched money, property, or me. Camille tried once more, that autumn, calling to ask if I'd consider a short-term, family loan to help with what she called a rough patch. I told her, calmly, that I wasn't in a position to help, and I meant it in more ways than one. She hasn't called since. I heard, secondhand, that whatever she and Derek had been building toward cooled fast once there was nothing left for either of them to gain from it. I don't know the details, and at some point I stopped asking. Some information simply stops being mine to want. I finished the renovation myself that fall, the garden Vera used to keep, the tomatoes, the back step, where she told me the thing I didn't fully understand until I was 34 years old sitting in a mediation room downtown. I reconnected with her sister, my great-aunt Corinne, who I'd barely known growing up because Denise never made room for that side of the family at holidays. Corinne comes by most Sundays now, the same day Vera used to have me over, and we sit on that same back step, and she tells me stories about my grandmother I never got to hear as a kid. I've started seeing someone, slowly and without any hurry, a structural inspector I met on a job site who reads county permits for fun the same way I always have, which either sounds very boring or exactly right depending on who you ask. He's never once asked me what the house is worth. I think about that birthday toast sometimes. To new beginnings. Some people finally get what's coming to them. Camille wasn't wrong, as it turned out. She just wasn't the one holding the receipt she thought she was. What I learned, watching that mediation room go quiet around me, is that people who show up right when you finally have something worth losing were rarely there for you in the first place. They were there for the math. And the safest thing you can ever do, long before anyone smiles at you across a table and tells you what's coming to you, is make sure your own math is already settled, quietly on paper, before they ever think to ask. If this is the kind of story that gets under your skin in a good way, that's exactly what Dark Revenge is here for, real feeling stories about the people who try to take what was never theirs and the quiet, unglamorous paperwork that stops them cold. Tell me in the comments, if someone in your family suddenly showed up warm right as your life got better, would you trust the timing, or would you already be pulling your own folder together? Like this video if Naomi's calm scared you a little more than it should have, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe. Dark Revenge posts a new one every day.